Welcome to The Pillars, the podcast of the 363rd ISR Wing of the United States Air Force. I'm Chaplain Jim Bridgham.
And I'm Dr. Jerry Walker.
And I'm Sergeant Ackerberg.
On each episode of The Pillars, we find a brief resilience topic so you can practically fix any potential roadblocks you encounter and finish a better wingman, airman, and leader. So what's today's topic?
So today we're talking about the fourth and final component of what makes a good leader. And this is from a keynote address that Lieutenant General Stephen Quast, the ATC commander, gave about 3 years ago, where he talked about four personality traits that make a really solid leader. Not just one who's effective in their work, but who's endeared to their people whom they lead. And we've gone through each of these personality traits in turn, and now we're going to get to the fourth and final one, which is compassion. So in previous episodes, we've covered nobility, humility, and courage. And this one, which really brings it all together, is compassion. And Chaplain, this is right up your alley, because I'm sure from a spiritual perspective, compassion is very significant.
Well, in the religious experience across faiths, compassion is truly the place where real growth occurs. Below that, we are looking for our material needs. We want to feel safe. But compassion is the place where you don't just enter into your own experience, but you enter into the other person's experience and seek understanding.
Yeah, it's from a psychological and developmental perspective, this is the point where we start to recognize we are not the center of the universe, and there are other people out there, and we begin to learn empathy and really start to connect with other people. It's the thing that happens to kids when they're getting to about 6 or 7 years old. They start to take other people's perspectives, and that develops or helps them develop a social mindset to think not just in terms of black and white, right and wrong, but if I do this, how is that going to affect the other person? Or this person is feeling a certain way, what can I do to help change that? And it's extremely important as we grow into adulthood and navigate increasingly complex relationships, because without compassion, our ability to relate with and to other people would be severely diminished.
Well, and one of the definitions I came across of compassion, because sometimes we use the term and we may not know exactly what it means, the definition I found was a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. Now, that might just seem to be overtly negative, and you might think someone who goes through a medical diagnosis, car accident, etc. But really, it's just empathizing with life. That maybe they're a parent and having difficulty with their children, or some challenges with a supervisor or coworker. You're just empathizing with them. In fact, the Latin origin of the word was just meant co-suffering. So we recognize that we are all going through challenges, and we just try to meet them in their experience and recognize people are responding as best they can. They don't generally come out in with a negative response. They're responding because of some reason. Maybe it's a value, it's some thought, some reason in their life that's really a core value as to why they're responding that way. And our job is to empathize with them in compassion, say, why are they responding like this? What is coming up in the person that's causing it? Now, it's easy to say in a podcast. It's difficult in some situations. One of the stories we were talking about before was that car accident I had in San Antonio. I'm TDY, I'm down at JBSA driving, and I'm at a stoplight right before one of these frontage roads, and I got hit from behind at a good clip, and it totaled the rental car, which is always a great thing to do on a temporary duty. And so I'm in blues. I step out of the vehicle. My car's totaled, and a gentleman walks out of the vehicle, and he's dressed in foreign attire and just starts losing his mind. Now, mind you, it's about 7 o'clock in the morning. San Antonio filled with military traffic, lots of vehicles looking over at the guy in blues being yelled at by someone in foreign attire. And my viewpoint at that was actually in a place of compassion, also in a place of concussion, but in compassion, and trying to understand and to de-escalate the situation. That was one of the places I can say I responded appropriately. And it took a few minutes to bring him down from his anger. And then he said, wait, are you okay? I'm like, oh, yeah, I think I'm fine. As I look down and can't read words on paper. I'm fine now, don't worry. But at that point, it was just trying to respond and realize, why is he like this? Why is he upset? Well, it's an amygdala hijack. Something's going on in his brain. He's used to driving conditions here. Like, there's some reason for him to respond like that.
And going back to that 5 Minutes to Thrive I wrote a few weeks back about the fundamental attribution error, it would have been so easy for you to have made a snap judgment about this guy's personality and say, he's angry, he's yelling at me, he's just a jerk.
Or yell back or respond.
And respond in kind and reciprocate exactly what you were getting. But instead, you took a moment, you paused, and rather than allowing that amygdala hijack like you were talking about, you thought through, what is this person experiencing? And that's hard to do. And especially, I would say, even harder when you're a leader of 50, 100, 500 people, to try to key into all those different voices and all those different needs, expressing what it is that they're feeling and what they're needing. I guess the challenge as a leader is, how do you have compassion for people as individuals, but then for an entire organization?
So there was a study done in Ontario, and what they did is they surveyed a bunch of key people in leadership roles from the start of their taking over that position, and they followed them for a few years in. And basically what they found is that towards the end, the leaders, their compassion had almost been cut down by 50%. And so there's something called compassion fatigue as well. And so not only do you, when you're in these authority positions, you have to make the hard decisions, so you're more likely to get callous. But then in general, you can go the complete opposite, and you can get so overwhelmed and have such compassion for everybody that you yourself are completely worn out. And as a leader, I mean, where's that balance? How do you tread that?
Absolutely. I see that in helping professionals all the time. I see that in first sergeants a lot, that they've either been completely worn down by the constant compassion and empathy that their job requires, that they're just getting burnt out, or the opposite side of the coin, they just become numb emotionally to everything that they see, and they treat every situation in terms of right and wrong, black and white, rather than empathizing with the other person. So I think it starts with yourself, as do a lot of these different traits. It starts with an honest self-assessment about where you are and how you feel like you relate to other people. But the cool thing about compassion, though, is that we have to give it to ourselves first before we can give it to other people. Because a lot of times we're our own worst critic. And if you're being really hard on yourself and you're magnifying all your perceived errors or flaws, and you're constantly criticizing yourself with your internal talk, that dialogue is then going to become externalized towards other people. So you hold yourself to high standards. It makes sense you would hold other people to the same standards, but what they're getting from you is a lot of the same self-criticism that you're giving to yourself. So I would say the first step is to learn to develop that compassion and understanding that you yourself, and we all are flawed. We are imperfect humans, and we make mistakes, and that's okay, because it's something that we all have in common. And then to project that out onto other people and recognize that people will have hard times, they will make mistakes. It doesn't necessarily characterize them as bad or evil or incapable or incompetent of being human or doing their job. But in that moment, what they need is understanding. And that understanding starts with empathy and compassion.
One of the concepts for growth from a spiritual perspective is that compassion allows you to... It's a good companion in your growth. What do I mean? When you encounter a challenge or difficulty, or maybe an obstacle you need to get over yourself, realize that obstacle is not just an obstacle to accomplish. It's there to teach you a lesson and to look at the lesson it's trying to teach you. So sometimes this is really difficult to identify just out of the blue, but one of the best contexts for growth is marriage. And why? Well, marriage requires a lot of compassion. When you're in a married situation, you have to understand your partner. You both are unique, independent people making very different choices, but trying to figure out a life together over years. And some people, they get married in 6 months and they're like, this is crazy, because there are so many choices that need to be aligned. But we come from a place of compassion, looking at our spouse saying, well, why would they make that decision? Why did they respond to me like that? Most of the time, that's not the way we respond, especially the people we love. We tend to be snippy or respond quickly. But if we can come from that place of compassion, it helps us to really understand those around us and help to really flourish in your relationship. But it's the closest relationships that we have, our close friends, our intimate relationships, where we develop that necessity of compassion, that you need to have compassion, and it will help you both grow.
That's so true. I can't tell you how many times I counsel people who are having relationship issues, and a lot of times it boils down to simple miscommunication. But that a lot of times will come from assumptions and a failure to empathize with the other person, a fixation on your own wants and your own desires, and seeing the other person's as diametrically opposed to yours, instead of taking the time to empathize from where they're coming from, to understand what their motivations are, and find the common ground, find the alignment between your two goals.